You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. Let's do it. So turn this off. Just make sure we are. Sometimes with technology, it becomes a bit complicated. You have to look at every parameter, but I'm happy with that. Okay. You guys know that is my passion to find ways in which we could elevate the human performance and potential so we could be living the best versions of our life. And this quest takes me all around the world. It takes me to the realm of biohacking, exploring nutrition, neuroscience, and much more. But today, I've got someone special on the show. And why she's special is because she's just done so many things in real life, and we're going to learn some real life applications on how to perform our best. Today on the show, I've got a speaker, a coach, a facilitator. She is a trainer. She works with executives, managers, and employees of the Fortune 500 companies, guys. And she teaches them about executive presence. She teaches about positive psychology. She's co-authored a book. She's an assistant in University of Pennsylvania, and she's lectured at so many cool places. Shannon Polly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to connect with your listeners truly all over the world.
Yes, certainly. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. I know I've been chasing you for a very long time, and I finally have you on the show, so that makes me very happy. So, Shannon, let's rewind time for a bit. Now, you've got so many titles under your belt, but I want to know, where did you start from? What kind of like education did you get into, and why did you choose this field?
It's a good question. It's an interesting journey. So I actually majored in theater studies at Yale. I went to drama school in London. I was a professional actor in New York City for 11 years, and I toured the country. And I had a great time. I loved performing. But what was interesting is that in college, I debated majoring in theater or psychology. I thought it was a little too practical to be a theater major, but in the end, the bug bit me, and then after a while, and I didn't realize what it was happening at the time, but at the moment, I was not feeling so happy as an actor. I was working and living in New York and traveling and having a great time. But what I found out later is that I was experiencing some pleasure, but not a lot of meaning. As you know, Marty Seligman's original theory of happiness and authentic happiness, that book. And so I was confused because people thought, oh, well, this is such an exciting life. And so I thought, well, I'll try working for a Broadway producer. Maybe it's the production side that I want to get involved in. And I got to meet, famous stars at opening nights with, be there with Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes. And I still wasn't happy because all of those people they were very wealthy, but they were contributing to the world in as far as art goes, but I didn't feel like I was contributing to the world. So I looked into PhD programs in psychology, but PhD programs back when I was looking are really focused on dysfunction, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. We've gotten very good at treating those things. But in the late 1990s, Marty Seligman said, well, it's just as valid to study what people do well as to study what they don't do well. So I was at a coaching coffee in New York, and I told this woman I was looking at PhD programs, but I wasn't really sure. And she said, oh, have you heard about the MAP program at Penn in positive psychology? And I said, no, what's that? So I looked it up, and the proverbial light bulb went off because it was research-based. I'd been looking at coaching programs that were not research-based, and I thought, if I'm going to add to my degrees, I want to have something that is actually based in science. So I went to the MAP program, and that set me off on a whole new course.
Wow, that's an interesting journey. I like how you've had a little bit of everything in that, from London to New York, and you were living the dream. I've always wanted to live in New York, so good on you for that. But also listening to your story, it brings so many things to mind. It's like, we've been thinking, like you mentioned, the world is constantly evolving, right? And it's always becoming better than it used to be, apart from the last 2 years that we were stuck in lockdown. But if you see the general stats, in the last 30 years, poverty rate have dropped. Our hygiene and our medical systems have advanced so much, and that has prevented millions of people from dying. Things like child labor is going low. There are bright things in the world that are happening. Yet, when you look at the current data, most of the people around the world aren't very happy. And now, happiness can be tied to so many different things. It There is some data that shows that happiness can be tied to your genetics, and then your genetics can have a predisposition of happiness set point in your life. Then you have things like what happened in your environment, which surprisingly doesn't account for so much. And then there are things that you can do to be more happy. Why do you think people aren't really happy all around the world these days?
That's a complex question. I think researchers are still working on that. What I would say
Mm-hmm.
is that um, a lot of it has to do with community and connections, and the fact that there are, the countries around the world that have strong community. In Latin American countries, they may have a lower GDP, but they have connections and family, and their well-being tends to be higher. I think that at least in North America and other places around the world, the nuclear family is gotten smaller, or the family unit of how people are supporting each other, and we are more disconnected. So I think that is part of it. I think the other thing is around social comparison. So social
Mm-hmm.
media has a lot of great uses of connecting people. I recently recovered from shingles, and I was feeling kind of isolated and alone at home, and I posted on social media, and immediately I had 50 people responding with ideas and advice, and I didn't feel alone anymore. Unfortunately, we get compare despair. Last summer, looking at Facebook with like, I'm going out to my house in the Hamptons, and and while some of us are in lockdown, stuck with children in a house, it's hard when we think that other people are doing better than we are. So I think that that's also a part of it. I also think that the sort of Buddhist philosophy that trying to pursue happiness might not actually make you happy, but the trying to pursue meaning may make you happier. So I think that that Marty's new theory, PERMA, of positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement, there may be some factors there in the meaning front as well.
Excellent. I am also very interested in the area of longevity. And when you look at all around the world, like you mentioned, you find communities where people are living extraordinary amounts of years. So we call them sanitarians, which live above 100, or super sanitarians. And there are certain geographical areas in the world which are called the blue zones, and they have similar things like, maybe their GDP isn't that high, but they're in close community, they spend time in nature, they spend time with family, they have meaning and purpose, they have some kind of a fasting or spiritual discipline. And surprisingly, these are all of these places, like there's multiple of them. There's Okinawa in Japan, there's Sardinia, there's Ikaria. And one of the things that I've found very common apart from all of these is that they're very stress free in life, so nothing bothers them a lot, and they're happy all the time. So I think there could be a big connection here where you have all of these other points that are necessary for happiness. Because in the past few years, a lot of people have, or a lot of young people at least, think that accumulating more wealth, or having more money, or having a higher paid job is one of the most important parameters when it comes to being happy. But
Hmm.
it only works till a certain bit. I mean, there is research that says, if you want to, let's talk in dollars. If you wanted to be happy, like there is a certain cut point at $75,000 per year, and once you cross $75,000 per year, then getting more money isn't going to make you very happy. But if your life and if your work has some meaning or purpose attached to it, that is the kind of things that actually bring happiness. once you, and again, we see it in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So once you meet with your basic needs, food, shelter, you have some money saved off to go for a vacation, and then after that, money doesn't become a priority. Do you see this a lot? Because I know in millennials that are going to be a higher amount of the workforce these days, um, these theories have been circulating a lot. But I wanted to know, in your experience, do you think that people are motivated with things more than money at this point, or most people are still in the money trap?
I think that it depends. It does become the hamster on the wheel, right? The hedonic treadmill of the more you get, the more you compare to other
Well,
people. I remember working for this very wealthy Broadway producer who was lamenting the fact that there was another producer who had more money than he did, millions more, and could invest in a different show. And I thought, wow, it's so interesting how the bar just keeps getting moved higher. I do like the research on money and spending it to buy time. So this week it's been a crazy year, and I found someone who could help take my child to summer camp, and she's doing a camp that is an hour and a half round trip from my house, and spending my money to be able to have that time where I can exercise or meditate or do work has definitely helped increase my well-being. But buying it to buy things generally doesn't as much. So the painting that hangs on the wall may make a real art historian happy. That might increase their well-being, but you have to tailor that to what you purchase. So what I'm finding is with younger people that I coach in organizations, it is harder, at least in North America, to get that American dream of the house and the down payment than it
mhm.
was for our parents' generation. So I think that those things that they're told that they should try to get, it's harder for them to get. Jobs, obviously, right now are a little more challenging for that generation as well. So I think and they are living on social media and comparing themselves to other people who can polish their lives and make it look perfect online. So definitely the younger generation has some challenges, and at the same time, I think that they are more willing to take a risk, leave a job if they don't like it, and say this isn't working for me. Whereas my father worked as the same job for 40 years. So there are definitely pluses and minuses on both sides.
Thanks for sharing that. So let's get on to the topic of positive psychology. Tell us what positive psychology is and why does it matter? Like, if someone who's listening to the show, let's split them into two categories. One person is just an average person living an average life. Why does it matter to them? And on the other hand, why does it matter to high performers?
So positive psychology is the scientific study of well-being. And it's not a new concept. It's been around since the days of Aristotle. Dr. Martin Seligman just coined the term in the late 1990s. It's also been around in terms of humanistic psychology, basically what makes life worth living. And I think that the general person would care about it if you care about your well-being, about being happier, about being healthier, and about living longer, as you talked about, because there are definitely correlations and causal data between well-being and health. I think that the high performers, that positive psychology has a lot of research and data specifically on strengths, character strengths, how you can leverage what you're already good at to perform even better. And that is a way in this age where we all are doing a lot of things at the same time to maximize the time. You're more energized when you're doing what you're good at. There's also a lot of data on resiliency. And in this last 16 months, a lot of people have had to reinvent themselves in order to continue to thrive and sometimes just survive while there's a lot of tragedy happening all around us. So I think that the research is really compelling, and it's good to know that there are practices just like going to the gym every day for your health. That there are positive psychology practices you can use to increase your mental health.
Amazing, and we'll get to those practices in a while. You mentioned Dr. Martin Seligman, and for those of you who don't know who he is, he's an intelligent guy. He's written over 30 books. I think his books have been published in more than 50 languages. He's also the director of positive psychology at Positive Psychology Center at Penn, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So he's how was your experience working with him? Like, can you share a few things that you learned from him straight, which you did not learn in your journey?
Well, he's really interesting because I think he is very honest about being a reformed grouch, and that his, the famous stories about his 5-year-old said, Daddy, if I can stop whining, you can stop being such a grouch. And he really went from, learned pessimism and
Mhm.
that field of study to learned optimism, and his new book, The Hope Circuit. So he has embodied that connections and energy that comes from putting this research out into the world and trying things on. The joke is that research is me search. And so I think his research into pessimism was because he was a pessimistic thinker, and now he has tools to not be. And Marty is always thinking big picture. He's amazing at raising money. He is amazing at influencing. He is always thinking about what's on the forefront. So every year we have a retreat, and all the MAP graduates come together, and he talks about the state of positive psychology in the world today and where he's looking to move forward. And he's 76. He's thinking about prospective psychology, looking toward the future, that we're not pulled by the past, we're drawn by the future. He launched Positive Health and got funding for that. So it's always very inspiring to think, to listen to him and see where his brain is going at the moment.
Yeah, he's a man that I really respect, and because he's just been in this whole field for such a long time. Like, he's been publishing things before I was born, and in that case he becomes like a true elder, like being one of those elders in the tribe who you can go up to and ask for anything, because he's just had so much of experience. And it's really great that you can work with him, and you can be guided towards so many things. So really nice to know that. And you trained with the US Army in a program called Master Resiliency Training. Talk to us about what is Master Resiliency Training and how was your experience there?
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be part of the training team. I was part of the civilian half of the training team. We had a hybrid civilian military training team, and we trained sergeants who had, on average, been in the Army around 15 or 20 years. And it was a train-to-trainer program where we were then training privates. They were then training the privates. So it was probably the most meaningful job I've ever had. We're training 150 sergeants at the same time. Sometimes we were doing some on virtually, which was, less less common than it is today. Sometimes we went on base, and listening to their stories and hearing what they have been through and how they've had to deal with it is really eye-opening. I think that I was definitely humbled with the level of work ethic, and also it was exciting to see the level of resistance at the beginning and how we won them over by the end. So normal trainings in corporate America might be a day, and the Army, we got them for 8 to 10 days. So then
Wow.
you
All
can
right.
actually see some change happen.
Mhm. And it's exciting to work with people of that caliber, because these guys have been through so much. Some of them might have been into situations of things like wars. Some people might have some explosive runoff like close to them, and I guess it's also difficult to manage them, because with all of these things that happen as a part of military work, like I mentioned, like some explosion around you, it also detroits your brain cells and then also lowers down cognitive performance. We always hear stories about post-traumatic stress disorders and traumatic brain injuries and things like that. So it's very interesting to see that you were able to go in there and like train them. Wow, it was good. Um,
I
was
want
there
to throw in
anything
one.
that
Oh,
you?
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to add one more thing. So I think that a lot of people have heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, but what was
Mhm.
fascinating to be able to share with the sergeants is the research around post-traumatic growth. And that when you go through a traumatic event, you're actually more resilient if you have a baseline level of well-being than people who haven't been through that event. So just being able to shift the narrative around PTSD was really exciting. And I think that getting to talk to them about their strengths and what's good, what's right with them was really eye-opening.
And do you think people who aren't in the military, they can um, bring in this into their lives, the post-traumatic growth? Because traumas happen everywhere, right? Some people have the trauma with the capital T, and some people have trauma with like a small t, but it happens everywhere and to most of us. And you talk about resiliency. Is there a preset number of things that you can do to become resilient? Let's say you weren't in the military, and someone who's listening to this show is probably sensitive or kind of gets reacts to things easily. How do people increase resiliency in their lives?
That's a great question. So, first, I think the answer is yes. You're absolutely right. A lot of people go through trauma, big T, little t. I like that. I think that over the last 15 months, we've all been through a global pandemic, which could be considered traumatic on various levels, depending on how close you are to it. And when I was talking to a therapist friend of mine, she said the challenge is that the demands have gone up and our resources have gone down. So all of us are feeling a bit strained and a need for resiliency. There are a lot of science-backed tools that can help. I think that Karen Reivich's book, The Resilience Factor, she was the lead trainer for the Army training, and she has a lot of great strategies in that book for the people listening. I would say that as far as the research goes, and you probably know this as well, that some of the biggest bang for your buck, as it were, is
Mhm.
meditation, and that there's a dosing effect with meditation. So the more you do, the more benefit you get, and you don't have to have a minimum as was once thought. Even at 5 minutes, 10 minutes can help as far as really shifting the way your neurons fire. I would say that the other thing that shifted, at least with the Army sergeants, the most was around gratitude and focusing on what's working. So, a funny story: we had the most famous exercise. It's called the Three Blessings exercise from positive psychology, where you write down 3 things that went well, why they happened, what they mean to you, what you can do to get more of that good thing. So, for those of you listening, you could try that tonight. And research showed that people who did that for a week were happier up to 6 months later. Now, there was some
Wow.
more subsequent research from Sonia Lubomirsky that if you feel like you have to do it, if it feels like a chore, it won't make you happier. So do it voluntarily. But we couldn't call the exercise the Three Blessings exercise for the Army because that would be a little too woo-woo, as we say in the
Mhm.
West. So we called it Hunt the Good Stuff. So every day for 10 days,
Interesting.
they had to hunt the good stuff. And on the first day, they had to do it. And they were like, ugh, okay, I had a good beer last night. And by day
Mhm.
4 or 5, they really started to get into it. And there was a sergeant who was sitting in the front row, and he took the microphone that was at his table and he said his good stuff was that he had a 10-minute conversation with his son, and it was the longest he'd ever talked to him. And I looked over
Wow.
and I see tears coming down his cheek. And I thought, wow, gratitude, that's really it's really remarkable.
Yeah, gratitude is super powerful. And also, I think it has a carryover effect because once you start putting down these ideas of, why you're feeling blessed and what happened well in the day, and then you support that with how can you get, like you mentioned, how can you get into that states again, and why do you think that was important, and
Mhm.
every time you write things like this, you're also giving your subconscious mind instructions to focus on that. So there's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system, and this is a region of the brain which is, it's similar to like pattern recognition. So let's say if you wanted to buy a car, and then you've gone out hunting for a car and you really like one special car, and chances are every time you're driving on the street you'll see that car pop up a lot. And it's not like that car just started coming up in your awareness right now. It was always there, but this part of your brain, which is um, known for recognizing the things that you want to focus on, keeps bringing the same things back to your attention again and again. So over a period of time, there's also this effect where if you focus on one thing, then more of that thing keeps coming to you. And then if it's a feeling, and if you can replicate how you're feeling in that present moment, then you are able to tap into those feelings again and again. We also know that neurons that wire together. So as long as you're firing those same neurons in the same thought process, chances are you're just keep getting better at it. And then it has a multiplier effect of, you mentioned 6 months, but could have it for anyone who's listening, just being in front of your family, or not being angry, or just showing up to work and not being frustrated is a big win as well. Because if you're conditioned to just, a lot of people have this negative bias around the world, and they think everything is happening to them, and they show up in places and are uncomfortable, then I think this is like a great exercise, because you're rewiring the brain's networks, neuronal networks, to recognize all the good things that are there. And the more energy and focus and time, even from the quantum theories, if you focus more on a certain thing, then you'll see more of it. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really valuable for people who are listening.
Thank
And
you. Yes, the reticular activating system. That's a good bit of info that your listeners should
yeah,
remember.
yeah, it always works. So, you also look at, or you tell people about their characters and how a person's character traits can influence their identity and how they show up in the world. Do you think, what kind of character traits do you think we need now in this world, which has never been like before 2021?
Mm.
Where some parts of the world are still, they're getting back to normal, but some part of the world are still in things like lockdown, and there are crises with jobs and opportunities. So what kind of character traits that should people employ at this point?
Yes, so there are a lot of different character assessments. There's Strengths Finder. I like to use the assessment by Chris Peterson and Marty Seligman, the Character Strengths Survey, viacharacter.org, if you want to look it up. It's actually free, unlike the other strengths assessments, and it's in 26 languages at this point. You can take it age 10 and up, and there's a lot of data on the relationship between strengths and well-being, strengths and health, strengths and performance. So the research on strengths is really that the top 5, 6, 7 strengths are considered your signature strengths. They're the ones that you don't have to, no one has to ask you to use them. They just come naturally to you. And those are the ones that energize you as well. So I think, I was coaching a woman at a professional services firm, and we looked at her top strengths, and they were, we divide them sometimes between the head strengths and the heart strengths. And she had things like love and kindness and social intelligence as top strengths. And her job was in mergers and acquisitions. And I said, so do you get to use your strengths at your work? And she said, no, I'm a woman in mergers and acquisitions. I can't show any of those or else I will look weak. And so it was kind of heartbreaking to think she wasn't able to use those at work. So we talked about how she could use them outside of work. And I think that really it's whatever your top strengths are to make sure that you get to use them on a daily basis, that you get to access them. If appreciation of beauty and excellence is a top strength, then make sure that you get to go outside. Make sure you get to appreciate a sunset. I have one client who is totally overwhelmed with work, but love of learning is a top strength, and she's learning a new language and she's learning to play piano. And that is her outlet during COVID. For me, kindness is a top strength. So even though I have a lot of work on my plate, I'm still baking food for my neighbor, my new neighbor, and I am organizing, parties for my kids' school to connect each other. So I think that it's not necessarily which strength, but using your top strengths. And the research specifically shows if you can use them in new ways, people who did that for a week were also happier up to 6 months later. So if it's something new and different, something novel, that is also a pathway to happiness.
Amazing. Thank you for that. You've also trained a lot of people from the Fortune 500 companies. What kind of challenges do people face in Fortune 500 companies on an individual level, on a company level? And yeah, talk to us about that.
Well, I think that people everywhere have similar issues. I think that we are all overscheduled and overbooked, and we think that we can do more than we can. So I like there's an HBR article called Manage Your Energy, Not Your Time. I don't know if you have show notes, but maybe you could pop that in there. That's one of my
Yeah, I'm just
favorites.
taking notes right now.
Great. Yeah, by Jim Lair. I really like that one because I think that ties into the well-being aspect and the health you were mentioning with the blue zones. I think the other thing it really comes down to is communication and managing other people, and that it's really challenging to motivate and manage other people. So in the communication front, how do you do that in a way where you have Slack, you have text, you have email, and everyone's overwhelmed and a little stressed out? And then, are you better at communicating with your boss? Are you better at managing up? Are you better at managing with your people? I was doing a 360 with a client recently who got great reviews from his direct reports and terrible feedback from his boss. So clearly, he may need to work on how to communicate what he's doing in these crazy times. But I feel like resiliency is a universal. We're all sort of underwater at the moment, and I have a lot of clients who think that they should just be performing at 2019 levels and that nothing should be different, even though they have, a pod in their basement and multiple children running around and interrupting phone calls at the same time, or they have, family members with health issues. We have, at least some of my clients seem to have this thought of, but I can't let anybody know that this is stressful for me. And I would say that the thing that I direct them to most frequently is self-compassion. So Kristen Neff is a researcher out of UC Berkeley. I think she's in Texas now. And her website is self-compassion.org. She has a couple books out, a new book coming out called Fierce Self-Compassion. And the misconception is that when we're kind to ourselves, that we're actually not going to perform as well. But the research doesn't bear that out. The research shows that actually when you're compassionate with yourself, you are more likely to perform better. Sort of like if you had a manager or a coach who is understanding, then you can relax and maybe perform better. Whereas if someone's a drill sergeant, that only works for a short period of time.
Yeah, one of the things that I also find commonly with people is that they don't give themselves a break. Most of the people want to step into the roles, even if they aren't really. They want to step into the roles of this type A go-getter personality, which 9 times out of 10 backfires because, as you said, it's good to be resilient, but there's a certain point till which you can put water in a cup and then it starts overflowing. your resiliency also sometimes has a limit. And when you have like, sick family members or uh, kids that are demanding your time and attention, and then you have to be on Zoom meetings and you have to submit certain things, it just takes out a lot of your energy. And like you mentioned, like managing your energy is highly important, because you can keep throwing things in the calendar day in and day out, but it all that thing like sucks out your energy. And if you're not taking the right steps, sleep could be one, nutrition could be one, taking time to meditate could be one, or other biohacks like putting electrodes on your head, I don't know what. But if you're not giving in the time to recharge your energy levels, then after a certain point of time, either you're going to be sick or you're just going to be frustrated and walk away from it. And a lot of people, I think, right now are in this position where they're either frustrated or they're just like, you know what, that's it, I'm done. And then that there's only so much point till where you can bring your resiliency to, given that every other factor that you're dealing with is under control. So I always keep tell people that, you know I can imagine that you have a lot of pressure on you and there is a lot of things that are happening and it might all feel chaotic, but you don't have to outperform everyone. You just have to do your best at the moment. And then if things don't happen in the right space, just allow yourself that time and space to be sensitive to yourself, and just don't be too harsh on yourself and say that I messed it up, or things, some kind of a negative emotion to that. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's I think everyone who's listening to this show, one of the things that you can take away from this is like, be more compassionate towards yourself. We are compassionate towards other people, but when it comes to us, it doesn't happen much. Now, you mentioned social intelligence. Tell us what social intelligence is and what could we do to take it to our advantage?
Social intelligence is one aspect, a smaller aspect of the umbrella of emotional intelligence, which is was first researched by Peter Salovey at Yale University. He actually was my professor. He was my Psych 110 professor, and I didn't know that he was famous when I was sitting in his classroom. He famously said that the biggest mistake he ever made was telling Daniel Goldman that he could use that title for his book, because of course Daniel Goldman became famous with his book
Mhm.
Emotional Intelligence. Then again, it became more of common knowledge. But social intelligence is a smaller aspect of it, which is an ability to read other people, to read their emotions, to read the room, and to be able to adjust how you're doing with based on what you notice, which I think is much harder nowadays that we are virtual. It is
Mhm.
great that people are getting on video, and before it was just phone calls, although albeit a little draining. So it's easier for social intelligence. But I think that not having that face to face and physically being in person can be difficult when you're trying to manage office politics, for example, or navigate relationships.
Mhm. And this brings me to my next question. Now, I agree, we're in behind computer screens and mobile phones and laptops, and now all of a sudden there's also another issue that comes in, which is trust. Because when you see people, somehow you kind of understand their vibe, or you can feel their energy or the way they talk, and it's much easier to trust people. Do you find it's becoming more difficult to trust people? And when you don't trust people, then you're either you aren't very transparent enough, or you're not, your guards is always up, so you're not going to be performing to your highest. Do you find that to be common?
So the research on performing virtually, because I actually was doing work on virtual teams before the pandemic, the research
Hmm.
shows that in order to convey trust in a virtual space, you have to be really accountable and do what you say you're going to do by the day you say you're going to do it, or communicate and over communicate what's happening, because people can't see you at the water cooler. They can't see, that you've come in and you're stressed out and it looks like you've had a hard weekend. All they know is you didn't send me the document that I needed to get. So I think that the short answer is yes, it is difficult to navigate completely virtually. We are human beings, we're meant to connect with people. Then again, there are positives. I mean, you and I are speaking right now, and without this technology, we might not have been able to do that years ago. So I would say that the hack, if you will, for it is being really transparent about what's going on. I was doing a workshop, and they wouldn't let my kid into camp. I had to tell the women on the line, this is what's happening. This is, and the same day my car got broken into. So it was a lot going on, but I was just transparent. And I just said, this is what's happening. I'm going to be right back as soon as I can. And I think that people are more willing to be open to that level of vulnerability.
Yeah, that was going on in my head, that I think vulnerability is one of the biggest things that is missing, because I think it's difficult to open up to people as well when it's virtual, and especially if you haven't met them ever. Then everyone always has, I mean, they have their own guard up, like I mentioned. When you're in front of people, it's easier to be more vulnerable. And thanks for sharing that. I think it's very important for people who are listening to know as well that the more you show others that you're like them, your vulnerable side, or it could be your joking side, whatever, the more people start, I wouldn't say trust, but like they just start connecting more with you. And then that's the time people will, it's more easier to pull off conversations, it's easier to pass on assignments, it's easier to cooperate, because they've seen this side of you which is not just like everyone else. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Now, what are some practical takeaways that people who are listening to the show can take away for, like, let's say, positive psychology and implement in their lives today? You mentioned gratitude, which is great, and you mentioned like there's the positive thinking approach, and the three blessings, we'll call it blessings for the show. And what else is on the list?
Well, I would clarify. I think I didn't say positive thinking. So there's a bit of a misnomer and a bad rap that positive psychology gets mixed up with The Secret and positive thinking, Think and Grow Rich. So I know what you meant. I just want to clarify, because we often get confused with Tony Robbins and happyology. While there is some research on, say, visualization, like athletes visualize the golf ball going into the hole, and you of course talked about how our subconscious helps us focus on what's good. Blatant positive thinking, even if you're in a bad mood, is actually worse, because you're basically denying the actual emotion that you're having. But back to your question. So I would say, I mentioned meditation. I have a colleague who has a website called mindfulness.com. His name's Corey Mascara. He is also a MAP graduate, and I think he does fantastic work. Tara Brock is also a great meditation teacher and has free podcasts. I mentioned gratitude, the three blessings exercise, and I mentioned self-compassion. So Kristen Neff has meditations on her website as well, and workbooks. I would say the other thing is around metacognition. And I'm thinking about this because Dr. Aaron Beck is 100 years old this week. He is the founder of cognitive therapy. And we have the honor of getting to see him on a webinar with Marty Seligman. He is sharp as a tack at 100 years old. And his daughter is carrying on the work. And his work is roughly, he calls it the ABC model. So you have an activating event, you have a thought, and you have a consequence. And then you dispute that thought. So let's say the example of when my car got broken into outside my house, and I had a workshop to do in 20 minutes. So the activating event is the car window getting broken. The thought is the B, the belief. The B is your heat of the moment thoughts. So that's where you don't edit. And trust me, when we had the military, when we did this with the military, there was a lot of colorful language. So the thought was, this is terrible. I have to do a workshop. I need to call the police. This happened before. I don't. They only got $2. What a waste! It's going to take. It's going to take all my time going to get the car repaired. Of course, why did this have to happen 15 minutes before? I'm going to get to be distracted in my workshop. The ticker tape goes through your head.
Yep.
So the C is the consequences, and that's your emotion or your reaction to the thoughts. So those thoughts made me more anxious. They made me frustrated. They made me distracted, less able to focus. And that's not helpful. And usually when something happens, we just think, wow, I'm frustrated. That made, my 8-year-old says, you made me mad. I can't say, well, actually, it's your thought that made you mad. So the D is the disputing. And that is where you play the attorney against your thoughts in B. So how can I argue against my thoughts? Well, this happens. It's not a big deal. It's just a car window. It'll get fixed. Nobody got hurt, right? So it's shifting those thoughts in the moment. So like what you were saying around focusing on what's good, it's similar. It's in the similar vein of let's look for what's working and dispute those thoughts. So I would say that as a tool has been really helpful. It's also in the resilience factor. And I find that my clients really respond to having something practical. They can write it down, and then you can start to see your patterns. So if every time my kids get in an argument, I have the same trigger, the same pattern, then I can start to work through that pattern, work on a deeper level.
I really like that. I'm going to keep it as a part of my daily thing as well. Because sometimes, you face situations in life, and especially when you haven't faced them before, it's really hard to get to that D. We're excellent at navigating through ABC and then getting stuck on C, and then just the cycle keeps on going with that C, but we never reach to that D. So whoever is listening, this is a fantastic model. Please use it, and thank you, Shannon, for sharing that with us. Now, we're coming to the end of this interview, and if you had a time machine, and if you could go back like 10 or 20 years, and you could give your younger self one or two or three pieces of advice. Now, this can be around psychology, it could be around health, it could be around parenting, it could be around anything. What would you go back and tell your younger self?
That's a great question. I would tell myself two things. One, I would tell myself that this body is the only one I have, and that I should focus on health. Turn away the Twinkies that I had in college. And the other thing I would say is to invest more in relationships. So also in college, I was so focused on theater, and I was passionate, and I was focused on the A in PERMA, the achieving. But I didn't engage as much with meeting those fascinating people. And now I look back and I think, wow, they're all doing amazing things, albeit in different fields. And I kind of missed out in always having such a singular focus, because the research in positive psychology can be summed up in 3 words. And this is from Chris Peterson, who has passed away. It all can be summed up with other people matter. You cannot reach the highest levels of happiness without having close relationships with other people. So for those of you listening, if you are in lockdown, or if you're just struggling to get by and you think, I'm not going to have coffee with that friend, I don't have time to do that, don't. Make sure that you connect with that colleague, with that friend, with that family member, because those are the things that really sustain you. And that's what I would have told my younger self.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. I think we're all running so fast in this thing called life that sometimes old relationships, old friends, sometimes we migrate to different countries and cities. And only when probably Facebook reminds us it's their birthdays, we think of them, but we should perhaps think of them more often. And one of the other things also I read this was a book, but there was an article summary about this, It was basically confessions of a person who was dying, and most of the people, when they're on their deathbed and you ask them like, what was it in life that you probably should have done more, and one of the things that they mention is relationships. And people, most of the times when they're dying, they always come up to this, that I wish I spent more time and energy and invested more in those relationships, and I could, spend a few more years with my friends, or my wife or my kids or my grandkids. So I think this is a common trend that we keep seeing, especially nowadays, because our attention is demanded by so many things. There are advertisements, there's social media, there's so many other things that can keep us busy and in a narrow focus. So take that time off, call an old friend, go give someone a hug, and life will be beautiful. Shannon, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate all the work that you've been doing, all the trainings that you've conducted, all the knowledge and wisdom that you've brought to us on the show today. Thank you so much. If people want to, reach you or learn more about you, what's the best way to get to know you?
Sure. My website is shannonpolly.com. So Polly, like Polly want a cracker, the bird. And the book is Character Strengths Matter: How to Live a Full Life. I don't receive any revenue from the book. All of it goes to a scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania. And we've raised over $60,000 for students to study at the University of Pennsylvania so far. We are hoping to create an endowment so that we can make this go on in perpetuity. So Character Strengths Matter, or my website. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much as well. And this is CJ, your host, signing out from the Shift with CJ podcast. Everyone, have a great day ahead of you, and Eid Mubarak to everyone who's listening.
Eid Mubarak. Happy Eid Mubarak.